Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar. My name is Stacey Dingwall. I'm the Senior Policy Manager at SFHA, and welcome this morning to our webinar, which is looking at delivering net zero affordable homes through greater use of offsite construction. We're lucky enough to be joined by three speakers for this morning's session. We have Gillian Campbell, who's working with the Scottish Government on their offsite construction strategy. We also have Mark Turley from More Homes Division at the Scottish Government, and we also have Colin Proctor joining us from Scottish Futures Trust this morning. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome, and it's great to have you. The recording of the session today, we will be recording the presentations that our speakers will be given, but the bit where you're discussing and asking any questions, we won't be recording that and sharing that, just to give you space to be frank in your questions and discussion, so that will just be kept within today's session, and we will also be able to share the slides from the speakers' presentations as well. So before I pass over to the speakers to get started, just a couple of housekeeping announcements. Once the speakers have given their presentation and we move on to the question bit, if you would like to speak, if you can just raise your hand. When you joined, your audio was muted, but if you would like to speak, just raise your hand and unmute yourself, and you can ask the speaker directly your question, or alternatively, the chat function is in your taskbar, which I'm sure you're very familiar with at this stage. So if you would prefer to just type your question in the chat there, and then I can ask on your behalf when we get to the Q&A section of the webinar. So we hope that you're comfortable with having your video enabled, so we can all see one another and have a bit of discussion when we get to that part of the session. But if you would rather not be on screen, that's absolutely fine. Just feel free to turn your video off in the taskbar when and if you want to. So thanks again for joining us. Hope you to join today's session, and I'm going to pass over to Gillian to kick us off. Thanks, Gillian.
Stacey, can I just say, we're also joined by my colleague Paul Dodd from SFT as well.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Colin. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Stacey. Thanks for that, and thanks all for coming along this morning. It's great to see so many of you here. As you'll recall, Housing to 2040 included a commitment. Bear with me. Sorry, I'm sharing my screen. Hang on a sec. Housing to 2040. There you go. Can you all see my screen? Yep. Thank you. So Housing to 2040 included a commitment to develop a net zero affordable homes strategy that will focus on greater use of off-site construction, and also the introduction of a new business model for the delivery of affordable homes based on collaborative procurement. We wanted to give you a bit of an update on where things are and get your views on where our thinking is, and talk to you about what the issues and opportunities are as we're developing the strategy. So I'm going to give a short presentation to kick off, just to give a bit of background and the current thinking. But we really want to hear from you, which is why, as Stacey said, we'll record the presentation, but we want people to be open and honest and be talking about what the opportunities and risks are around this. So we'll not record that second session. So I'll move on quite quickly, because the key part of this is to hear your thoughts on what we're talking about. So first of all, just to give a bit of background. As I said, Housing to 2040 is the sort of source of this. That set a target of 100,000 affordable homes by 2032, which is obviously increased now to 110,000 with the deal with the Greens, and was announced in the programme for government last week. And interestingly and importantly, 10% of these homes should be in rural, remote and island communities, with 70% of them being for social rent. Now, that target is set in the context of the climate emergency, and having a target of net zero by 2045. And Housing to 2040 does recognise the central role that homes play in delivering that target and the pathway to net zero, and aims to ensure that we build strong foundations needed to meet the climate change targets. We need to be building for the future and not building homes that need to be retrofitted in 5 to 10 years' time. So Housing to 2040 says that, leading by example, all new homes delivered by RSLs and local authorities should be zero emissions by 2026. And these targets in themselves are set within quite a challenging operating environment. We're seeing demands increasing in terms of space standards and consideration of place. We are, of course, seeing costs increasing, and we've got some real challenges with materials and supply chains at the moment. We've also known for years that there are some real structural challenges in relation to the construction industry, with labour shortages and skills shortages and an ageing workforce. And also on the back of the pandemic, we're all starting to look at how we can do things differently and opportunities for building a green economy as we recover from the pandemic. Back in 2018, the Scottish Government, along with the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre and Scottish Enterprise, commissioned Napier University to do a piece of work looking at the potential role of offsite construction in Scotland. And that report was published in January 2020 and is driving much of the thinking behind this strategy. The research identified a number of benefits from making greater use of offsite construction. Firstly, the opportunity to reduce the time taken in the design and build stages of construction. There was an opportunity to improve cost and quality in construction. Significant opportunities to lower waste, energy consumption and reduce carbon emissions from manufacture and assembly of homes. But also the opportunity to tackle some of the construction industry challenges around workforce. So there's a real opportunity to create a different kind of working environment which would encourage a more diverse workforce in the construction sector, but also address some of the health and safety standards associated with the industry. The research made a number of key recommendations, primarily that there needed to be a clear national strategy setting out a direction of travel. But that strategy would need to be built upon some key elements. Firstly, that there should be a shift to a design for manufacture approach. Secondly, a more collaborative approach to procurement. A whole life cycle approach to cost assessment rather than focusing on the upfront capital costs. It suggested we needed greater standardisation of house types and components to fit with a design for manufacture approach. The creation of a pipeline of demand that would allow us to maximise the benefits of and efficiencies of offsite construction, and also better sharing of experiences across the sector and across industry more widely. So that research was published in January 2020, and it led to the development of the Edinburgh Homes Demonstrator Project, which I'm sure a lot of you will have heard of. And that's seeking to develop and trial a new approach to briefing, design, procurement and construction of affordable homes. Mark can maybe say a bit more about that later, but I'm not going to dwell on it too much just now, but it's important to note that this national strategy is very much building on the learning that's coming through that very practical example in the Southeast, and that learning and experience that's been gained through the Homes Demonstrator Project is very much informing where we're going with the national strategy. The strategy is very much about collaboration. So as well as the extensive engagement that fed into Housing to 2040, there's been a lot of engagement over this last year as well. Back in January, there was a stakeholder meeting, and if I remember rightly, I think Stacey attended that one. But that group felt that wider engagement was needed. So there were 2 facilitated workshops that were held in March, and I think about 30 people attended each of these. But in addition to that, I was asked earlier in the year to carry out a fairly comprehensive piece of research and engagement with local authorities and RSLs, as well as social housing reps across Scotland, to try and better understand the appetite for and experience of offsite construction. And the learning from that is also feeding into this strategy. And then in July, we held a further stakeholder meeting, but it's not finishing there. We're holding a number of sort of roundtable sessions like this one with key representative and membership bodies. We're having a number of one-to-ones with RSLs and local authorities, and also with industry, house building industry members. We held a very interesting design roundtable earlier this week with RIAS and a group of architects, looking at some of the design principles that we could be taking forward. And we'll also be consulting on a draft paper or discussion document at some point over the next few weeks, and are aiming to publish the strategy later this year. So the strategy, and where are we now? What's our thinking on it at the moment? Well, It will be clear from the outset that this is a journey. We're not going to be changing things overnight. It is a long-term strategy that will include some short-term and longer-term actions and changes. It will explain why we need to change, so addressing some of these challenges I touched on already, the increasing demands in terms of zero emissions homes, new build heat standards, space standards, place considerations, all these things. And the strategy will set out some key principles which will be largely drawn from Housing to 2040. And these will include affordability, both in terms of the cost of delivery, but also critically the costs to the end user or the occupant of the house, both in terms of rent level and in terms of cost to live in. And critically, it will focus on a fabric first approach, so building new highly energy efficient homes where energy demand is reduced, thereby minimising costs associated with heat decarbonisation. The key principles will also include building quality homes that reflect placemaking ambitions, embedding circular economy principles, growing skills, and building local supply chains. We also recognise the very different local economies across Scotland, and a key principle will be to ensure that the strategy reflects the needs of all of Scotland and doesn't seek to impose urban solutions on rural areas, for example. And the final principle will be around collaboration. We want to work with both the supply and the demand sides to maximise the benefits of offsite construction. The strategy is being developed in collaboration with stakeholders, and taking it forward will also be dependent on collaboration. So the strategy will set out a vision of what a new sort of operating environment will look like, and that's based on 4 key features. First of all, increased use of offsite construction to mitigate the challenges we've already talked about and make the most of the opportunities we have. Secondly, greater transparency and management of the pipeline of affordable homes. It will also look at a new delivery model, which is based on collaborative procurement, both vertical and horizontal collaboration, and we'll come back to that. And finally, increased use of domestic materials and supply chains. So I'll look at each of these in turn before we get to the discussion side of things. So first of all, greater use of off-site construction. What we're thinking is that we're going to propose a fairly gradual transition from what we're currently doing, which is predominantly based on open panel construction, which is minimally delivered off-site, to one which is where far more of the value is delivered off-site. And this can range from closed panel systems, which are already quite widely used, particularly in the Central Belt and Ayrshire, to volumetric systems, which we're beginning to see a bit more of in the sector as well. One of the measures of effectiveness of this strategy is likely to be pre-manufactured value, which is a term some of you may have come across. And this measures the percentage of the value that's delivered through off-site manufacturing. We're doing some work just now to try and understand what the benchmarks are, where we are at the moment in terms of PMV levels with what we're building just now. But indicatively, open panel systems could have a PMV of say 45%, closed panels maybe 65%, and volumetric up to 85%. So what we'd be trying to see is a shift upwards in the PMV for affordable homes. The second feature I'd mentioned was greater transparency and management of the pipeline. So the house building industry has told us that in order to invest in scaling up off-site manufacturing facilities in Scotland, they need greater transparency of the pipeline. So progress has already been made in this, and SFT has created a pipeline tool through the Edinburgh Homes Demonstrator project, and that's been replicated for the whole of Scotland, and you can start to unpick what's in the pipeline by sort of house type and delivery agent and so on. But transparency isn't enough on its own, and to actually get the real benefits of this massive 110,000 home programme over the next decade, to start to get the benefits from that, we need to start effectively managing that pipeline. And that is what leads us to look at introducing a new delivery model that's based on collaborative procurement. We're looking at a shift to a design for manufacture and assembly approach, first of all, which identifies those elements that could potentially be standardised. Now, standardisation absolutely does not mean homes all looking the same. We're talking about standardisation of the manufacturing process that allows us to save time, reduce waste and reduce costs, but not at the expense of the quality of the home in place. The Edinburgh Homes Demonstrator project is developing a suite of house typologies and components that could potentially be standardised, and there's some really positive work there. I think working across the 6 local authorities, they have managed to get down from, I think, what was about 95 different house types to somewhere between around 15 different house types, I think. So there's real progress being made in sort of rationalising what house types are being taken forward. So that work is helping to shape this, but what we need to be mindful of is that we're ensuring that we do have that flexibility to respond to local architectural heritage and place needs. The current approach to delivering affordable homes is quite a linear process of design, then procure, then build. And this approach isn't necessarily suited to offsite manufacturing, and it tends to lead to projects being reworked, disputes arising, and just generally inefficiencies. There are also multiple small development projects with an average being around 30 homes. And research has found that there's actually quite little sharing across the sector and across industry from this development experience. So we're looking at a new delivery model that is focused on strengthening the voice of customers to give greater clarity to industry, to enable them to plan, invest and grow their businesses. And at the core of that collaborative delivery process is what we're calling vertical and horizontal collaboration. So vertical collaboration brings basically all of the people who are involved in that commissioning, procuring, designing, building of affordable homes together from day one to reduce inefficiencies and disputes and so on. But to really capture the benefits of offsite construction, we need to be doing things at quite a different scale. So the strategy is proposing that through horizontal collaboration, clients will work together to aggregate demand, to exert greater influence over the market. At the moment, we were hearing from a lot of stakeholders that RSLs and local authorities can be quite limited in terms of what they can specify and the extent to a certain extent, they have to take what the market has got. But by aggregating demand, we're hoping to see a shift, or trying to create a shift in that balance of power and give social landlords a stronger voice to demand the products that they want to meet their tenants' needs. And then the final element of the delivery model will be procurement and funding that considers the whole life cost of homes rather than the initial capital cost. And whole life costing is used in a number of organisations in relation to asset management of existing stock, but not so much in terms of new build. And the strategy will look at how this can shift and how contracts could potentially be based on longer term performance of assets and homes. And then the final feature of this new sort of operating environment would be, and it's absolutely central to the strategy, is about increasing use of domestic materials and supply chains. We've got a huge opportunity. £110,000 homes is a huge opportunity, not just to be building more better quality homes, but also to support the development of a green economy and community well-being. So discussions are taking place, for example, with Scottish Forestry, and there's a real opportunity to scale up the use of Scottish timber. And we're also doing a piece of work to deconstruct the typical affordable home that's being built and look at the supply chains for components and consider what opportunities there are for building these supply chains up within Scotland.